The transport ship landed with a heavy thud on the rocky surface of Kepler 442b. Dust clouds rose around the landing pad as the engines powered down with a long, tired whine. Hyunwoo Kim grabbed his single duffel bag and stepped out into the alien world's harsh sunlight. The planet looked exactly like the briefing materials had described. Red rocks stretched in every direction under a pale yellow sky. Strange purple plants grew in twisted shapes from cracks in the stone. The air smelled like copper and ozone, with an electric feeling that made the hair on his arms stand up. "Welcome to hell," muttered the transport pilot, a gruff woman from Mars Colony. "Hope you packed light because this place will eat anything fancy for breakfast." Hyunwoo nodded and slung his bag over his shoulder. Inside were his tools, some clothes, and a few personal items. No fancy gadgets or high-tech equipment like the other researchers brought, just the basics. The research station sat on a flat area between two hills about a kilometer away. Even from this distance, Hyunwoo could see the impressive structures the other species had built. Shimmering energy domes, crystalline towers that caught the light, and bioorganic shapes that seemed to pulse with their own life. As he walked toward the station, his boots crunched on the gravelly ground. The gravity here was slightly heavier than Earth's, making each step feel deliberate. The electromagnetic readings on his simple handheld device jumped around wildly. This planet was electrically active in ways that Earth never was. The main building was a joint construction, built with materials and techniques from all the different species. It looked functional but strange, with smooth curves next to sharp angles, and surfaces that shifted color depending on the viewing angle. Captain Veltar waited at the entrance. The Saurian commander stood nearly 3 meters tall, his reptilian, scales a deep green that reflected the planet's odd sunlight. His yellow eyes looked down at Hyunwoo with barely concealed disappointment. "So you are the human representative," Veltar said, his voice carrying the hissing accent of his people. "Where is the rest of your equipment?" Hyunwoo held up his single bag. "This is it." The captain's head tilted to one side, a gesture that showed confusion in Saurian body language. "One bag?" The Klaxon delegation brought 17 containers of scientific instruments. The lithoid engineer arrived with enough materials to build a small city. "And you bring one bag?" "I travel light," Hyunwoo replied simply. Veltar's throat made a sound that might have been laughter or disgust. "Follow me. The briefing begins shortly." Inside the main building, the air was cooler and had been adjusted to be breathable for all the different species. Hyunwoo could taste the chemical filters working to balance oxygen, nitrogen, and trace gases that each race needed. The briefing room was large and circular, with workstations designed for different body types. Hyunwoo took a seat at the human-designed chair while the other researchers filed in. Dr. Nix-Ara entered first. The Klaxon scientist moved on 6 legs with quick, precise steps. Her insect-like body was covered in a hard shell that glowed with soft blue patterns. Compound eyes the size of dinner plates turned toward Hyunwoo with what seemed like curiosity. "The human has arrived," she said, her voice coming from speakers since her people communicated through chemical signals that were translated by computers. "I was expecting someone more impressive." Engineer Bractor came in last, his crystalline body chiming softly with each step. The lithoid stood 2.5 meters tall and looked like a walking sculpture made of purple and gold crystal. Light passed through him in complex patterns, creating rainbow reflections on the walls. "Are we certain this human is qualified?" Bractor asked, his voice sounding like wind chimes in a breeze. "My preliminary scans detect no advanced technology on his person." Captain Veltar activated the holographic display in the center of the room. A 3-dimensional map of the research area appeared, showing the station and the surrounding terrain. "Welcome to Research Station Kepler 442b Alpha," the captain announced. "We are here to study this planet's unique electromagnetic phenomena. Each of you will establish individual research shelters in designated areas." The map zoomed in to show 4 marked locations around the station. 3 were in relatively protected areas near the base of hills or in shallow valleys. The 4th was on an exposed ridge about 2 kilometers from the main station. Dr. Nix-Ara You will take Zone A, near the mineral deposits. Engineer Bractor gets Zone B close to the crystalline formations. I will establish command shelter in Zone C overlooking the main approach. Yunwoo waited for his assignment, though he suspected he already knew what it would be. Human Kim will take Zone D, Veltar continued, pointing to the exposed ridge. On the high ground, the other researchers looked at each other. Dr. Nixara's compound eyes shifted patterns. That location is completely exposed to weather systems. Is that wise? The human requested a challenging assignment. Veltar lied smoothly. I am merely accommodating that request. Yunwoo said nothing. He had not requested anything, but arguing would not change the situation. He studied the holographic terrain, noting the elevation, wind patterns, and geological features. Each shelter must be self-sufficient for extended periods, the captain explained. The research mission will last 1 full planetary year, approximately 18 Earth months. Supply drops are scheduled every 3 months, weather permitting. What about the storms? Asked Dr. Nixara. The preliminary reports mentioned severe weather events. Veltar's scales shifted color slightly, showing discomfort. The previous survey team reported occasional electrical storms. Nothing our technology cannot handle. The Saurian energy shields have protected our colonies through much worse conditions. Engineer Bractor's crystalline form chimed with confidence. Lithoid construction techniques create harmony with planetary frequencies. Our structures become stronger during electrical events, not weaker. Klaxon bioadaptive architecture responds to environmental changes in real time, Dr. Nixara added. My shelter will literally reshape itself to optimal configurations as conditions change. All eyes turned to Hyunwoo. And what advanced technique will humans employ? Asked Captain Veltar with barely hidden mockery. Hyunwoo thought about the tools in his bag. A hammer, some basic measuring instruments, a few electronic devices that would probably fail in the first storm. Nothing that would impress these advanced civilizations. I'll figure something out, he said. The silence that followed was telling. Dr. Nixara's bioluminescent patterns dimmed with what might have been embarrassment for him. Engineer Bractor's crystal stopped chiming entirely. Captain Veltar's yellow eyes showed something that looked like pity. Very well, the captain said finally. You have 1 week to establish your shelters before the research phase begins. Supply requisitions must be submitted by tomorrow morning. Dismissed. As the others filed out, discussing their plans in excited tones, Hyunwoo remained seated, studying the holographic map. The ridge they had assigned him was indeed exposed, but it was also stable granite bedrock. Good drainage, clear sightlines in all directions. It was actually not a bad location if you knew what to look for. Later that evening, Hyunwoo walked to Zone D to examine his assigned territory. The ridge rose about 50 meters above the surrounding area, its surface covered with loose rocks and hardy vegetation. The wind was constant here, carrying the ever-present electrical smell. His handheld instruments confirmed what he had suspected. The electromagnetic activity was stronger on the ridge, but it was also more predictable. The readings followed patterns that reminded him of thunderstorms back on Earth, just more intense and more frequent. As he walked the perimeter of his future building site, the lights from the other zones were clearly visible. Dr. Nixara's area glowed with the soft blue of Klaxon bioluminescence as automated systems began preparing the ground. Engineer Bractor's location sparkled with crystalline formations that his equipment was already analyzing and cataloging. Captain Veltar's command shelter site buzzed with the activity of energy shield generators being installed. Yunwoo knelt down and picked up a handful of the local soil. It was gritty, with high mineral content. The rocks were mostly granite and basalt, both excellent building materials if you knew how to work with them. Some of the loose stones showed signs of electrical scarring, evidence of repeated lightning strikes. He pulled out a small notebook and began sketching. Not digital designs or computer models like the others would use, but simple pencil drawings of what he had in mind. His grandfather had been a builder in Korea, constructing houses that stood for generations through typhoons, earthquakes, and floods. His father had been an engineer, designing structures that could survive anything nature threw at them. Hyunwoo had learned from both of them. As he worked by the light of his small flashlight, making notes and measurements, he could hear conversations carrying on the wind from the other work sites. The advanced civilizations were discussing power requirements, materials specifications, and environmental adaptation systems. None of them seemed to be talking about what would happen if all that technology failed. The next morning, Hyun-woo submitted his supply requisition. The list was simple: basic tools, some metal mesh, concrete ingredients, and permission to use local materials. The first month of the research phase passed quietly. Each species settled into their routines, conducting experiments and gathering data about Kepler 442b's strange electromagnetic properties. The planet's electromagnetic field was unlike anything in their databases, but the weather remained stable enough for outdoor work. Hyun-woo spent most of his time making improvements to his shelter. Every morning he would walk the perimeter, checking for any problems that might have developed overnight. Then he would work on what the others considered pointless additions to his already primitive structure. The human is still building, Dr. Nixara observed during one of the weekly status meetings. Her bioluminescent patterns showed mild confusion. My instruments detect construction activity at Zone D daily. Captain Veltar looked at the surveillance feed from Hyun-woo's area. The human was working on what appeared to be a drainage system around his stone building. Perhaps he has discovered structural problems. I am not surprised. Engineer Braktor's crystals chimed with interest. What kind of modifications is he making? My resonance sensors detect metallic installations beneath ground level. Probably trying to reinforce his failing foundation, Captain Veltar said dismissively. Primitive construction techniques require constant maintenance, but Hyun-woo's work was more systematic than they realized. Over the weeks, he had been quietly implementing improvements that were invisible from a distance. The drainage system was just the most obvious part. Under the ground around his shelter, he had installed a network of copper cables connected to deep grounding rods. The metal mesh embedded in his walls was connected to this system, creating what electrical engineers on Earth called a Faraday cage. The thick stone walls provided natural insulation, while the air gaps between inner and outer walls created additional protection. His roof was not just heavy stone slabs, but a carefully engineered system with multiple layers. Metal sheeting underneath provided electromagnetic shielding, while the stone provided physical protection. The weight was supported by thick walls that transferred the load directly into the bedrock foundation. The small windows were positioned to avoid the prevailing wind directions, and each had heavy shutters that could be secured from inside. The ventilation system used simple mechanical principles rather than electronic fans, with carefully designed air channels that would continue working even without power. I do not understand the human approach, Dr. Nixara said during another morning observation session. Her compound eyes tracked Hyun-woo as he worked on installing what looked like a manual water pump. Why does he not use automated systems like civilized beings? Because he cannot, Engineer Braktor chimed confidently. Human technology is centuries behind ours. They still rely on mechanical devices because they lack the knowledge for proper energy manipulation. Captain Veltar's scales shifted to show agreement. Their entire civilization is built on crude materials and manual labor. It is actually somewhat admirable how they have achieved space travel despite these limitations. Meanwhile, the other shelters showcased the peak of their respective technologies. Dr. Nixara's bioadaptive structure had grown additional sensor pods and research appendages. The walls could literally taste the air and adjust their permeability based on atmospheric conditions. Internal temperature and humidity were maintained automatically by biological systems that required no external power. Engineer Braktor's crystalline tower had become even more impressive over the weeks. New crystal formations grew daily, expanding the structure's capacity to resonate with planetary frequencies. The entire building hummed with harmonic vibrations that were supposed to strengthen its molecular bonds. Electromagnetic sensors throughout the crystal matrix could detect and analyze even the smallest energy fluctuations. Captain Veltar's command shelter remained the most obviously advanced. The energy shield dome shimmered constantly, maintaining a perfect barrier against all external forces. Inside, sophisticated environmental systems kept conditions ideal for saurian physiology. Communication arrays provided constant contact with the orbiting research vessels and the homeworlds of all three species. One morning, about 6 weeks into the research phase, Dr. Nixara made an announcement that got everyone's attention. "I am detecting unusual patterns in the electromagnetic readings," she reported during the daily briefing. Her bioluminescent displays showed complex data patterns. The baseline activity has increased by 37% over the past week. Engineer Bractor's crystals resonated with concern. "My harmonic sensors confirm this observation. The planetary frequency is shifting toward higher energy states." Captain Veltar examined the data on his holographic displays. "Is this normal seasonal variation?" "Unknown," Dr. Nixara replied. "The previous survey team was not present during this planetary season. We have no comparison data." Hyunwoo had been quietly taking his own measurements with simple instruments. His readings showed the same increasing electromagnetic activity, but he had been expecting it. The patterns were similar to what happened on Earth before major thunderstorms, just much stronger and lasting much longer. "What does the human think about these readings?" Engineer Bractor asked, more out of politeness than genuine interest. Hyunwoo looked at his handwritten notes. "Storm season is starting. The electromagnetic activity will probably keep increasing until it reaches a critical point, then we'll get major weather events." "Fascinating primitive intuition," Captain Veltar said with amusement. "However, our advanced analytical systems provide much more precise predictions. The energy increase is interesting but not threatening. Our shelters are designed to handle far greater stresses than this planet can generate." Dr. Nixara's patterns flickered agreement. Klaxon bioadaptive systems actually become stronger under electromagnetic stress. The increased energy will be absorbed and converted to structural improvements. Lithoid crystal resonance feeds on electromagnetic fluctuations, Engineer Bractor added confidently. Higher planetary energy will only enhance my shelter's stability and data collection capabilities. Hyunwoo nodded politely but said nothing more. That afternoon he began making final preparations to his shelter. He secured all loose items inside, checked his manual water pumps and ventilation systems, and made sure his emergency supplies were easily accessible. The other researchers noticed his increased activity and found it amusing. From their perspective, the human was showing typical primitive fear of natural phenomena that advanced technology could easily control. "Look, the human is boarding up his little cave," Captain Veltar observed. "Such touching faith in stone and metal barriers." "Perhaps he senses something we cannot," Dr. Nixara suggested, though her tone indicated she found this unlikely. "Some primitive species develop heightened instincts for danger detection. More likely he is simply anxious about his inadequate construction," Engineer Bractor chimed. "Knowing that your shelter is inferior would naturally cause preparatory behaviors. But Hyunwoo's preparations were based on more than instinct. His instruments were showing electromagnetic readings that reminded him of the data from Earth's most severe thunderstorm systems. The planet's electrical field was building toward something that would make ordinary lightning look like static electricity. On Earth, major thunderstorms could generate electrical discharges measured in millions of volts. The readings from Kepler 442b suggested events that might reach billions of volts. That level of electrical activity would turn the entire planetary surface into a conductor, with current flowing through anything that offered a path to ground. Advanced electronic systems would be particularly vulnerable. Energy shields, bioadaptive sensors, crystalline resonance arrays, all of them relied on precise electrical circuits that could be overwhelmed by massive electromagnetic pulses. Simple mechanical systems, heavy shielding, and proper grounding, on the other hand, had been protecting humans through electrical storms for generations. 2 weeks later, Dr. Nixara's instruments recorded another significant change. "Electromagnetic activity has doubled again," she reported. Her bioluminescent patterns showed growing concern. "At this rate of increase, we may exceed the design parameters of some systems." "Impossible," Captain Veltar declared firmly. Saurian energy shield technology has protected our colonies through stellar flares and magnetic storms. No planetary weather system can challenge our engineering. Engineer Bractor's resonance frequency had shifted to a higher pitch, indicating stress. However, perhaps we should review our contingency protocols. Even superior technology benefits from careful preparation. Agreed, said Dr. Nixara. I will begin implementing additional adaptive responses in my biosystems. Enhanced flexibility should accommodate any environmental changes. All three of them looked toward Zone D, where Hyunwoo was working on what appeared to be additional stone barriers around his shelter entrance. What is the human doing now? Asked Captain Veltar. Through their surveillance equipment, they could see Hyunwoo carefully fitting stones around his doorway, creating what looked like a crude airlock. He was also installing heavy wooden shutters over all his windows and checking the connections on his grounding system. Building additional primitive defenses, Dr. Nixara observed. How quaint, as the supply ship arrived 3 days ahead of schedule, its captain clearly eager to leave the planet as quickly as possible. The electromagnetic readings had been climbing steadily for 2 weeks, and even from orbit the ship's instruments were detecting unusual activity. I don't like the look of this place, Captain Rivera muttered as she supervised the supply transfer. She was an experienced pilot who had delivered cargo to dozens of hostile worlds, but Kepler 442b made her nervous. The whole planet feels like it's getting ready to explode. Lieutenant Jae-min Park stepped off the transport with his communications equipment. He was the second human to join the research station, a young officer with expertise in maintaining contact with Earth during adverse conditions. Any word from the research teams about the electromagnetic changes? Captain Rivera asked him. Jae-min checked his portable instruments and frowned. These readings are incredible. I've seen similar patterns in Earth's weather data, but nothing this intense. What kind of patterns? Captain Veltar demanded, joining the conversation. The Saurian commander had come to oversee the supply delivery personally. Storm formation, Jae-min replied simply. On Earth, electromagnetic activity spikes like this usually happen before massive thunderstorm systems. But these readings are off the charts compared to anything we've recorded. Captain Veltar's scales shifted to show dismissive amusement. Human meteorology is hardly applicable to alien worlds. Our species have studied atmospheric dynamics for millennia. We are quite capable of handling whatever this planet produces. Dr. Nixara approached the landing pad, her bioluminescent patterns flickering with scientific curiosity. Lieutenant Park, do humans have experience with electromagnetic storms of this magnitude? Not this magnitude, Jae-min admitted, but we've survived plenty of electrical storms. My grandfather lived through Hurricane Zhao in 2031, one of the worst electromagnetic events in Earth's recorded history. The whole eastern coast lost power for weeks. Fascinating primitive anecdotes, Dr. Nixara said politely. However, our bioadaptive systems are designed to thrive under electromagnetic stress. Increased energy actually enhances their performance. Engineer Bractor arrived last, his crystalline form chiming with confident frequencies. Lithoid engineering harnesses electromagnetic forces rather than resisting them. The higher the planetary energy, the stronger our structures become. Captain Rivera finished loading the last supply containers onto the station's transport vehicles. She was clearly eager to leave. Whatever you folks are planning, I'd recommend you be ready for it. These readings remind me of the pre-storm conditions on Jupiter's moons, and those storms can strip hull plating off starships. After the supply ship departed, leaving a trail of ionized particles in its wake, the research station settled back into its routine. But the routine was becoming more difficult to maintain as the electromagnetic activity continued climbing. Dr. Nixara's biosensors began requiring constant recalibration. Her shelter's adaptive systems were working overtime, reshaping and modifying their configuration multiple times per day as the electrical environment fluctuated. Engineer Bractor's crystalline resonance arrays were generating increasingly complex harmonic patterns. The frequencies were so intense that they could be heard as a constant musical humming that carried across the research area. Captain Veltar's energy shields were consuming more power each day to maintain their protective barriers. The generators ran continuously, Their output adjusted constantly to match the changing electromagnetic conditions. Only Hyunwoo's readings remained stable, measured by simple analog instruments that were unaffected by the electrical interference. The human's primitive equipment cannot even detect the sophisticated energy patterns we are observing, Captain Veltar commented during one of their evening briefings. He is essentially blind to the actual conditions. Jae-min had been comparing his readings with Hyunwoo's handwritten logs. Actually, his measurements are quite accurate. He's just using different methods to collect the data. Different methods? Dr. Nixara's patterns shifted with curiosity. Analog instruments, mechanical readings, visual observations. Less precise than digital systems, but they don't suffer from electromagnetic interference, Jae-min explained. Engineer Braktor's chimes took on a puzzled tone. Why would anyone choose less precise instruments? Because they keep working when the precise ones fail, Hyunwoo said quietly from the back of the room. The alien researchers exchanged glances. From their perspective, choosing inferior equipment made no sense. Their civilizations had spent centuries developing increasingly sophisticated instruments precisely to avoid the limitations of primitive measurement techniques. Over the next few days, the electromagnetic readings reached levels that began affecting even the advanced systems. Dr. Nixara's biosensors started giving conflicting readings as the electrical interference overwhelmed their organic circuits. Engineer Braktor's crystal arrays had to be recalibrated twice daily as the planetary frequencies shifted beyond their design parameters. Captain Veltar's energy shields began showing signs of strain. The generators were running at maximum output, and even then, the protective dome flickered occasionally as power surges overloaded the distribution systems. Perhaps we should consider temporary evacuation to the orbital stations, Dr. Nixara suggested during one particularly difficult day. Her bioluminescent patterns showed stress markers that indicated genuine concern. Impossible, Captain Veltar declared firmly. Our mission schedule cannot be disrupted by weather patterns. Besides, our technology is designed to handle far worse conditions than this. The Klaxon Council expects results from this research phase, Dr. Nixara agreed reluctantly. Evacuation would be seen as failure. Engineer Braktor's harmonics had shifted to frequencies that sounded almost anxious. Perhaps we could request additional power generators from the supply ships. Jae-min had been monitoring communications from orbit. The supply ships have moved to a higher orbit. Captain Rivera reported that the electromagnetic interference is affecting their navigational systems. This news created an uncomfortable silence in the briefing room. If conditions were affecting starships in orbit, the surface installations were experiencing far more severe stress than anyone had admitted. What do Earth's weather records suggest for storms of this intensity? Dr. Nixara asked Jae-min, her scientific curiosity overcoming her species' pride. Jae-min pulled up data files on his portable computer. The worst electromagnetic storms in Earth's history generated electrical discharges in the billion-volt range. They could disable electronic systems across entire continents. Billion volts? Engineer Braktor's chimes rose to a higher pitch. That would exceed the input capacity of most power management systems. Most systems, yes, Jae-min agreed. That's why critical infrastructure on Earth uses mechanical backups and electromagnetic shielding. Electronic systems are efficient, but they're vulnerable to electrical overload. Captain Veltar's scales shifted to show irritation. Human engineering is forced to use primitive backups because of technological limitations. Advanced civilizations design systems that can handle any conceivable stress. Any conceivable stress based on previous experience, Hyunwoo said quietly. But what if you encounter something you haven't experienced before? The question hung in the air uncomfortably. Each species had designed their systems based on conditions from their home worlds and previous colonies. None of them had ever encountered a planet with Kepler 442b's unique electromagnetic properties. That evening, atmospheric conditions took another dramatic turn. The sky began showing constant displays of colored light, like aurora, but far more intense. Purple and green streamers of energy danced across the heavens, creating patterns that shifted and flowed like living things. Dr. Nixara's shelter began exhibiting strange behaviors. The bioadaptive walls started reshaping themselves rapidly, cycling through configurations as they tried to respond to the chaotic electromagnetic signals. The constant reshaping was putting tremendous stress on the organic systems. Engineer Bractor's crystalline tower had become a light show. The harmonic resonance was so intense that the entire structure glowed with shifting colors, and the musical humming had risen to levels that were almost painful to listen to. Captain Veltar's energy dome was flickering more frequently. The power generators were straining to maintain the protective field against increasingly powerful electromagnetic pulses from the atmosphere. From his stone shelter on the ridge, Hyun-woo watched the light show with growing concern. His analog instruments were showing readings that reminded him of the most severe thunderstorm data in Earth's archives. But these readings were several orders of magnitude stronger. Jaemin's communication equipment was beginning to fail. Digital circuits were becoming unreliable as electromagnetic interference increased beyond the limits of error correction systems. "I'm losing contact with the orbital stations," he reported during an emergency briefing. "The interference is too strong for normal communication protocols." "How long until the storm peaks?" asked Dr. Nixara. Her bioluminescent patterns were showing stress markers that indicated her systems were approaching their limits. Jaemin looked at his failing instruments, then at Hyun-woo's hand. The storm began at a 347 local time, though calling it a storm seemed inadequate for what actually happened. The electromagnetic readings that had been climbing for weeks suddenly spiked beyond anything the instruments could measure, and then the planet became something no one had ever seen before. Lightning struck continuously, not in brief flashes but in sustained arcs of energy that lasted for minutes at a time. The entire sky became a web of electrical discharge, with bolts jumping between the aurora streams and creating a network of pure energy above the research station. Dr. Nixara was the first to realize her shelter was in trouble. The bioadaptive systems that had been reshaping constantly for days suddenly began reshaping frantically. The walls bulged and twisted as the organic circuits tried to process electromagnetic signals that were far beyond their design parameters. "Systems overload," she broadcast on the emergency frequency. "Bioadaptive responses becoming chaotic, structure integrity declining." Her shelter's walls were changing shape every few seconds, cycling through configurations at random as the organic computers crashed and restarted continuously. The biological sensors that were supposed to analyze environmental conditions were being overwhelmed by electrical signals stronger than anything in their programming. Inside her shelter, Dr. Nixara watched in growing alarm as her equipment began failing. The advanced instruments that had been collecting valuable research data were shutting down one by one as electromagnetic pulses fried their delicate circuits. Engineer Bractor's situation was even worse. The crystalline tower that had been humming with harmonic resonance for weeks was now screaming. The frequencies had risen to levels that were painful to hear, and the crystal matrix was beginning to develop stress fractures. "Warning," his message came through on the communication system, though the words were distorted by static. "Resonance cascade failure. Crystal matrix approaching critical stress levels." The electromagnetic energy that was supposed to strengthen the crystalline structure was instead overloading it. Like a wine glass shattered by a singer's voice, the harmonic frequencies had exceeded the crystal's ability to absorb and redirect the energy. Fractures spread through the beautiful geometric patterns as the structure tried to handle forces it was never designed for. Captain Veltar's energy shield dome was flickering like a dying light bulb. The generators were running beyond their maximum rated capacity, but they could not keep up with the electromagnetic bombardment from above. Each lightning strike that hit the dome sent power surges through the system that overloaded circuit breakers and shut down protective systems. "Shield generators at 112% of maximum," he reported tersely. "Multiple system failures. Power distribution network unstable." The three advanced shelters, each representing the pinnacle of their civilization's engineering, were all failing simultaneously. The technology that had seemed so superior was proving vulnerable to conditions that the designers had never imagined. In his stone shelter on the ridge, Hyun-woo listened to the emergency broadcasts while watching the electromagnetic chaos through his small, shuttered windows. His analog instruments showed readings that would have been impossible for digital equipment to display. The numbers were simply too high and changing too rapidly. Lightning struck his shelter 17 times in the first hour. Each bolt delivered billions of volts directly to his roof and walls. But instead of devastating his primitive structure, the lightning followed the path he had designed for it. The metal mesh embedded in his walls conducted the electrical energy down through his grounding system and into the bedrock below. The Faraday cage effect protected the interior of his shelter. The electrical energy flowed around the outside of the metal mesh, leaving the space inside electrically neutral. His simple mechanical systems continued working normally, while the advanced electronic systems elsewhere were being destroyed by electromagnetic pulses. Dr. Nixara's bioadaptive shelter collapsed first. The organic systems, stressed beyond their limits by constant configuration changes, finally gave up trying to adapt. The walls stopped reshaping and instead began to dissolve as the biological components died from electrical overload. "Evacuation necessary," she broadcast frantically. "Structural failure imminent. Seeking emergency shelter." She grabbed her emergency supplies and ran out into the electromagnetic hell that the planet's surface had become. Lightning struck the ground around her constantly, turning the rocky surface into a maze of electrical arcs. Her protective suit's electronics failed within seconds, leaving her with only basic life support. Engineer Bractor's crystalline tower lasted 30 minutes longer before the harmonic cascade reached critical levels. The beautiful structure, that had resonated so perfectly with the planet's natural frequencies, was torn apart by those same frequencies when they became too powerful. "Crystal matrix failure," he transmitted in the moments before his communication systems died. "Harmonic resonance beyond safe parameters, structure collapse beginning." The tower didn't fall down so much as it sang itself apart. The harmonic frequencies that had been strengthening the crystal bonds instead shattered them, sending fragments of purple and gold crystal flying in all directions as the entire structure disintegrated. Bractor fled into the storm, his crystalline body chiming, in distress as electromagnetic pulses interfered with his natural electrical systems. Like Dr. Nixara, he found himself exposed to conditions that his advanced civilization had never prepared him for. Captain Veltar held out the longest. Saurian military engineering was designed to handle extreme conditions, and the energy shields had protected their colonies through stellar events that would destroy most worlds. But even Saurian technology had limits. The shield generators exploded at 512 hours, finally overwhelmed by electrical energy that exceeded their ability to redirect or absorb. The protective dome collapsed instantly, leaving the command shelter exposed to the full fury of the electromagnetic storm. "Command shelter compromised," Veltar transmitted as his systems failed around him. "All defensive systems offline, evacuating to emergency position." He abandoned his sophisticated command center and ran into the storm, joining Dr. Nixara and Engineer Bractor in seeking shelter wherever they could find it. The three alien researchers, huddled behind a low ridge about half a kilometer from the main station, trying to protect themselves from the constant lightning strikes with nothing but the basic emergency equipment they had managed to grab before their shelters failed. "This is impossible," Captain Veltar said, his voice barely audible over the electrical chaos. "No planetary weather system should be capable of generating this level of energy." Dr. Nixara's emergency suit was providing minimal protection from the electromagnetic interference. "Our instruments must have been malfunctioning. These readings exceed theoretical limits for natural phenomena." Engineer Bractor's crystalline body was flickering with erratic light patterns as electromagnetic pulses disrupted his internal systems. "Perhaps the storm will pass quickly. Natural phenomena usually exhaust their energy rapidly." But the storm showed no signs of weakening. If anything, it was intensifying. Lightning struck the ground continuously, turning the entire research area into an electrical grid. The abandoned shelters, their advanced materials now liabilities rather than assets, were being systematically destroyed by forces they had not been designed to handle. Through the chaos, A steady light was visible on the ridge where Hyunwoo's shelter stood. Not the flickering glow of failing electronic systems, but the steady light of simple mechanical systems that continued working regardless of the electromagnetic interference. "The human shelter appears intact," Dr. Nixara observed, her voice filled with disbelief. Captain Veltar's scales shifted with reluctant admiration. "How is that possible? His construction is the most primitive of all our designs." Lightning struck the stone building again as they watched, the electrical energy flowing down through the walls and into the ground without causing any apparent damage. The structure remained solid and unchanged while the remains of their advanced shelters continued to be torn apart by the storm. "We need to reach that shelter," Engineer Braktor said, his harmonic frequencies showing increasing distress. "Our emergency equipment will not sustain us for much longer in these conditions." The journey across the storm-swept terrain to Hyunwoo's shelter was one of the most terrifying experiences any of them had ever endured. Lightning struck the ground around them continuously, creating a deadly maze of electrical arcs that they had to navigate carefully. Dr. Nixara's emergency suit was damaged by electromagnetic pulses, forcing her to rely on basic life support functions. Engineer Braktor's crystalline body was developing stress fractures as the electrical interference disrupted his natural systems. Captain Veltar's military-grade emergency equipment was failing as rapidly as civilian gear. They reached the stone shelter just as Dr. Nixara's suit began displaying critical failure warnings. The heavy wooden door opened before they could knock, revealing Hyunwoo waiting for them with emergency supplies. "Come in quickly," he said calmly, as if inviting colleagues in from ordinary rain rather than an unprecedented electromagnetic disaster. Inside the shelter, the three alien researchers found themselves. The storm lasted for 3 days and 2 nights, though it was hard to tell the difference between day and night when the sky was a continuous web of electrical discharge. For 72 hours, Kepler 442b's surface experienced electromagnetic conditions that turned the planet into the largest electrical conductor in the known galaxy. Inside Hyunwoo's stone shelter, the 4 researchers settled into a routine that would have seemed impossible during their first weeks on the planet. The human who had been dismissed as primitive was now their source of survival, and his simple systems provided everything they needed. Oil lamps gave steady light that never flickered or failed. Manual water pumps provided fresh water from the deep well Hyunwoo had drilled. Mechanical ventilation systems circulated fresh air through channels that used natural convection rather than electric fans. Emergency food supplies were stored in metal containers that doubled as Faraday cages, protecting sensitive instruments from electromagnetic interference. "I do not understand how we failed to recognize the superiority of these methods," Dr. Nixara said on the second day, her bioluminescent patterns showing embarrassment and curiosity. She was examining Hyunwoo's grounding system through one of the small windows. "Because they look primitive," Hyunwoo replied simply. "Your civilizations spent centuries developing more sophisticated alternatives. Why would you think about going backward?" Engineer Braktor's harmonic frequencies had stabilized since taking shelter, though his crystalline body still showed stress fractures from the electromagnetic damage. "But surely your people developed these techniques because you lacked access to advanced technology." "Actually, it's the opposite," Hyunwoo explained. "Earth has plenty of advanced technology, but we also have frequent electrical storms, so we learned to build things that keep working when the advanced technology fails." Captain Veltar had been studying Hyunwoo's construction notebooks, trying to understand the principles behind the shelter's design. The hand-drawn sketches and calculations seemed crude compared to the holographic engineering models his people used, but they had produced results that superior technology could not match. "These calculations," he said, pointing to pages of handwritten numbers. "You determined the electromagnetic shielding requirements without computer modeling." "My father taught me the formulas," Hyunwoo replied. "The math hasn't changed in centuries, you just need to account for the variables specific to this planet." Dr. Nixara's compound eyes focused on the shelter's ventilation system. "This air circulation method requires no external power source. How did you calculate the proper channel dimensions?" "Trial and error, mostly. plus some basic principles about air pressure and temperature differences. Hot air rises, cold air sinks. Design your channels to take advantage of that, and you get circulation without pumps. The simplicity of it was almost insulting to their advanced civilizations. These were techniques that their species had abandoned millennia ago, when they developed more sophisticated alternatives. But those sophisticated alternatives had all failed when faced with conditions their designers had never imagined. On the morning of the third day, Jamin's voice came through on the emergency radio frequency. He was calling from the main station, which had been protected by its underground location and heavy electromagnetic shielding. All shelters, please respond. Storm intensity is decreasing. Electromagnetic readings dropping to manageable levels. Hyunwoo picked up his manual radio transmitter, a simple device that used mechanical generators rather than electronic circuits. Zone D responding. All personnel accounted for and in good condition. Zone D? Jamin's voice carried surprise. You have researchers from the other zones? Affirmative. Captain Veltar, Dr. Nixara, and Engineer Braktor are all here. Their shelters were destroyed in the storm. The silence on the radio channel lasted for several seconds before Jamin responded. Understood. Rescue teams will reach you as soon as surface conditions permit. By noon, the storm had weakened enough for the electromagnetic readings to drop below dangerous levels. The constant lightning strikes became occasional flashes, and the aurora displays faded to normal background levels. When they finally opened the shelter door and stepped outside, the landscape had been transformed. The 3 advanced shelters were completely gone, leaving only scattered debris and blackened ground where they had stood. The main research station's communication arrays had been destroyed, though the underground sections had survived. Dr. Nixara's bioadaptive shelter had been reduced to a puddle of dissolved organic materials. Engineer Braktor's crystalline tower was now a field of glittering fragments scattered across several hectares. Captain Veltar's command dome had left nothing but a crater where the energy generators had exploded. Only Hyunwoo's stone shelter stood unchanged, its thick walls showing no damage beyond some scorch marks where lightning had struck the grounding rods. The rescue team arrived that afternoon, led by Dr. So-Young Lee, a human physicist who specialized in electromagnetic phenomena. She brought advanced equipment to assess the damage and help evacuate personnel if necessary. These readings are incredible, she said as she examined the data from the storm. We've never recorded electromagnetic activity at these levels. It's like the entire planet became a giant electrical circuit. Captain Veltar's scales showed deep embarrassment as he gestured toward the remains of his command shelter. Our technology was completely inadequate for these conditions. How could we have prepared for something so far outside our experience? Dr. So-Young smiled sympathetically. You couldn't have. Earth's civilizations made the same mistakes for centuries. We built increasingly sophisticated systems until we learned that sophistication becomes a liability when conditions exceed design parameters. She pulled out a portable computer and showed them historical data from Earth. Here's a recording from the Great Storm of 2089. Electromagnetic activity reached levels that shut down electronic systems across 3 continents. The only infrastructure that kept working was the old mechanical systems that everyone thought were obsolete. Dr. Nixara studied the data with professional interest. So humans developed electromagnetic resistant technology because you had no choice? Exactly. When your planet regularly produces electrical storms that can destroy advanced electronics, you learn to build things that don't depend on electronics. Simple mechanical systems, electromagnetic shielding, proper grounding. These aren't primitive techniques. They're evolved responses to hostile conditions. Engineer Braktor's harmonic frequencies showed wonder and respect. We thought human technology was inferior because it seemed less sophisticated, but it was actually superior for these specific conditions. Different approaches for different challenges, Dr. So-Young agreed. Your bioadaptive systems would probably work wonderfully in stable electromagnetic environments. Your crystalline resonance technology could be incredibly useful for energy collection under normal conditions. And Saurian energy shields are excellent for protecting against most types of radiation. Captain Veltar straightened with renewed pride. Then our technologies are not failures, merely inappropriate for this specific situation? That's right. You designed systems for the conditions you knew about. When faced with unprecedented conditions, those systems couldn't adapt fast enough. Hyunwoo had been quietly checking his shelters, systems while the others talked. Everything was working perfectly just as it had before the storm. So what happens now? Dr. So-young grinned. Now we combine our technologies. Human electromagnetic resistant engineering plus alien innovations could create hybrid systems that work under any conditions. Over the following weeks, as the research station was rebuilt, the different species began sharing their knowledge in ways that none of them had considered before. Dr. Nixara's bioadaptive principles were combined with human mechanical engineering to create systems that could reshape themselves without relying on vulnerable electronics. Engineer Braktor's crystalline resonance techniques were integrated with proper electromagnetic shielding to create structures that could handle both normal operations and extreme electrical events. Captain Veltar's energy shield technology was redesigned with mechanical backup systems that could maintain basic protection even when electronics failed. The new hybrid shelters that emerged from this collaboration were marvels of engineering that combined the best elements of all four civilizations. They were sophisticated enough to take advantage of advanced technology, but robust enough to keep working when that technology failed. Jae-min established communication protocols using both electronic systems for normal conditions and mechanical backups for emergencies. The hybrid approach ensured that contact could be maintained regardless of electromagnetic interference. During the rebuilding process, Dr. So-young shared more data about Earth's experience with extreme weather events. The storm you survived was classified as a Category 2 electromagnetic event on our scale. Significant, but not the worst we've recorded. Captain Veltar's scales shifted with alarmed curiosity. Not the worst? What would a maximum category event involve? Dr. So-young pulled up more historical data. Category 5 events can generate electromagnetic pulses that affect entire star systems. The worst one in recorded history